The crosshair settled on Marcus Harlow's head. Distance, 1,218 meters. Wind, 15 knots from the northwest, gusting to 18. Temperature dropping as the storm rolled in over the Montana peaks. Grace Harding's finger rested against the trigger of the Remington 700, applying exactly 2 pounds of pressure. 3 more pounds and the bullet would fly. She had made this shot 1,000 times before, in sandstorms outside Kandahar, in snowstorms above the Hindu Kush, in the thick humidity of the Mekong Delta where the air itself seemed to bend the trajectory. This shot on this ridge in these conditions was easier than most. Through the scope, Marcus Harlow moved with the casual arrogance of a man who believed himself untouchable. 6'4", 240 pounds of muscle earned through punishing gym sessions and protein shakes. His bald head gleamed even in the flat light of the approaching storm. Staff Sergeant Marcus Harlow, Navy SEAL Team 9, the kind of operator who made the cover of recruitment posters. He had no idea death was watching him from Ridge 447. Grace's breathing followed the pattern drilled into her over 20 years of combat. Inhale for 4 counts, hold for 7, exhale for 8. At the natural pause between heartbeats, the moment when the body achieves perfect stillness, that was when you squeezed. Not pulled, squeezed. Her finger pressure increased to 4 pounds. Harlow laughed at something one of his teammates said. The sound didn't carry this far, but Grace could see his mouth open, his shoulders shake. Probably another joke at someone's expense. Probably another cruel observation about the support staff he considered beneath his notice. 4.5 pounds of pressure now. The bullet waited in the chamber, custom loaded, match-grade powder, copper jacket polished until it caught the light. She had made this round herself, weighing each component on a scale accurate to 1/10 of a grain. This bullet would fly true. Grace's hand was perfectly steady. No tremor, no hesitation, just the cold mechanical precision of a weapon system that happened to include a human being. 5 pounds. Then she exhaled completely and lifted her finger from the trigger. She lowered the rifle and reached for her binoculars instead. Through the civilian-grade optics, she watched as Harlow's 8-man team formed up around 4 Humvees. They were loading gear, checking weapons, moving with the practiced efficiency of operators who had done this 100 times. They looked confident, prepared, ready for anything. They had no idea they were walking into a killing box. Grace knew because she had spent 8 weeks tracking the patterns, the encrypted radio traffic on unauthorized frequencies, the midnight meetings in the old ammunition bunker, the small deposits into offshore accounts that matched perfectly with the timing of compromised patrol routes. Someone on this base was feeding intelligence to the militia groups that had been growing bolder in the mountains around Fort Sentinel. And today, that intelligence was going to spring the trap that had been 18 months in the making. Grace watched Harlow's team mount their vehicles. She watched the convoy roll toward the main gate. And she watched something else that the SEAL team couldn't see from ground level. 3 pickup trucks positioned on parallel roads, timing their movement to intersect with the SEAL route at Copper Ridge Canyon. She had known this ambush was coming for 72 hours. She could have warned them, could have walked into Colonel Briggs's office and laid out the evidence, could have saved 8 lives without firing a single shot. But Grace Harding had learned long ago that the most dangerous missions were the ones where you had to let people walk into hell, because only in hell did the real devils reveal themselves. She packed the rifle back into its maintenance bag, zipped it closed, and began the descent from Ridge 447. Her knees screamed with each downward step. The shrapnel lodged near her spine sent electric jolts down her left leg. Her hands, which had been rock steady on the trigger, now trembled as she gripped the rocks for balance. Grace Harding was 52 years old. She had been dead for 3 years, and she was very good at her job. 48 hours earlier, Fort Sentinel had looked like it always did at 3 in the morning. Dark, cold, empty except for the handful of personnel pulling night watch. The kind of hour when the world belonged to insomniacs and janitors. Grace pushed her cleaning cart down the corridor toward the mess hall, the squeaky wheel announcing her presence to no one. She wore the same thing she wore every night: faded blue coveralls 2 sizes too large, thick rubber gloves, and boots with worn-down heels that made her walk with a slight limp. Her hair, more gray than brown now, was pulled back in a bun that added 10 years to her appearance. She was invisible, that was the point. The mess hall smelled like industrial cleaner and the ghost of whatever the cooks had burned for dinner. Grace moved through the space with the methodical efficiency of someone who had mopped this floor 500 times, which she had. Every night for 3 years, the same pattern, the same rhythm, the same invisibility. But tonight, Grace's eyes caught something different. Under the table where Harlow always sat, barely visible even in the harsh fluorescent light, were 3 small drops of liquid. Most people would have missed them entirely. A janitor certainly would have. But Grace Harding had spent 2 decades learning to see what others missed, and these drops didn't belong. She knelt slowly, making a show of wringing out her mop, and pulled a small UV penlight from her pocket. Janitors carried UV lights to check for biological contamination. At least, that's what she would say if anyone asked. The drops glowed brilliant blue under the ultraviolet beam. Blood fresh, less than 6 hours old. Grace pulled out her phone, the cheap prepaid model she used for her janitor persona, and snapped a photo. Then she stood, put the light away, and continued mopping as if nothing had happened. But her mind was already calculating. Harlow hadn't been in combat in 3 weeks. His team had been stateside, training rotations only. No live fire, no injuries reported. So where had fresh blood come from? She filed the question away and kept mopping. The mess hall door slammed open at 04:15, exactly 45 minutes earlier than it should have. 4 men stumbled in, loud with alcohol and testosterone. Grace recognized them immediately. Harlow, Jake Drummond, the petty officer who filmed everything and posted it to social media for his 100,000 followers. Felix Santos, lean and dangerous looking even when drunk. Danny Park, communications specialist, face locked in his habitual expression of boredom. SEAL Team 9, America's finest, out past curfew, drunk and looking for entertainment. Grace kept mopping, invisible. Harlow saw her and grinned. He walked directly toward her mop bucket, watching her face the whole time, and kicked it over. Dirty water spread across the floor she had just cleaned. "Oops," Harlow said. "Better clean that up, Grandma, that's what you're good for." Grace said nothing. She had learned long ago that silence was armor. She simply reached for her mop and began cleaning the spill, her face showing no reaction at all. Drummond pulled out his phone, already filming. "Oh man, this is perfect. Check it out, guys. Geriatric Janitor, the sequel. What do you think? Should I post this?" "Definitely," Santos said, leaning against the wall. "Your followers eat this stuff up. Old lady doing menial labor, peak comedy." Park yawned. "Can we get food? I'm starving." Grace wrung out the mop, her movements slow and deliberate. Her hands trembled slightly as she worked. The tremor was real, a souvenir from the nerve damage in her shoulder, but she had learned to make it look worse than it was. Old, weak, harmless. She bent to retrieve a piece of debris from the spill, and the mop handle slipped from where she had leaned it against the table. It fell. Grace's left hand shot out and caught it mid-air without looking. reflexes operating on pure muscle memory from 2 decades of combat training. She caught it at the perfect balance point, controlled, precise. For exactly 1 second, she had moved like what she really was. Then she fumbled the handle, let it clatter to the floor, and bent to pick it up with exaggerated slowness. The mask back in place. Most of the SEALs didn't notice. They were already losing interest, moving toward the kitchen to raid the refrigerators. But standing in the doorway, unnoticed by everyone, was Ahmed Rashid. The interpreter had been at Fort Sentinel for 2 years. Quiet, professional, fluent in 6 languages. He had seen Grace catch the mop handle. He had seen the speed, the precision, the unconscious competence of someone who had been trained to move efficiently under stress. Their eyes met for exactly 2 seconds. Grace looked away first, returning to her mopping. But she knew. Ahmad knew. And they both knew that the other knew. It was a game they had been playing for 3 years, this careful dance of recognition and silence. The SEALs eventually left, laughing about something on Drummond's phone. Grace finished cleaning the mess hall and moved on to her next stop, the motor pool. The motor pool at 0500 was Grace's domain. The mechanics didn't arrive until 0630, which gave her 90 minutes alone with the vehicles. She used every second. Tonight she was scheduled to inspect the Humvees assigned to SEAL Team 9's patrol. Routine maintenance, fluid checks, tire pressure, the kind of work that kept the base running and that no one ever thought twice about. Grace started with Humvee 4. She slid underneath on a creeper, her flashlight revealing the vehicle's undercarriage in harsh white light. She moved methodically, checking suspension points, brake lines, drive shaft connections. She found the first crack in the left front suspension mount after 12 minutes. Hairline fracture, invisible to casual inspection, but she could feel it when she ran her gloved finger along the weld point. Stress failure. This vehicle had been run hard, probably during the desert training rotation 2 months ago, and the fracture had been slowly growing ever since. Humvee 4 was going to fail. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but soon, and probably at the worst possible moment. Grace marked it on her inspection sheet and moved to Humvee 7. The second fracture was in the rear suspension. Same type of stress failure. Same invisible crack waiting to become a catastrophic failure. She documented both issues, photographed them, and wrote up a detailed maintenance report. Then she walked across the base to the office of Master Chief Patricia Vale. Vale had been at Fort Sentinel for 4 years, 28 years of naval service, multiple combat deployments, decorated, respected. She was the senior enlisted advisor to Colonel Briggs, which meant her word carried weight on everything from personnel assignments to equipment maintenance. Grace knocked on the door frame. Vale looked up from her paperwork, her expression neutral. "Mrs. Harding, little early for reports, isn't it?" "Found some issues with the Humvees for today's patrol," Grace said, holding out the folder. "Stress fractures. Both vehicles should be pulled from service until repairs are completed." Vale took the folder, flipped through it without really reading. SEALs know how to handle equipment. These vehicles are rated for rough terrain. "Yes, ma'am, but the fractures are in structural points, if they fail under load." "I'm sure the team can manage," Vale said, handing the folder back. "Was there anything else?" Grace looked at the older woman for a long moment. Vale's face showed nothing but mild impatience. But Grace noticed other things. The way Vale's left hand had moved slightly toward her desk drawer when Grace mentioned the patrol route. The micro-expression of tension around her eyes. The fact that this was the 7th time in 8 weeks that Vale had dismissed a safety concern related to SEAL operations. Pattern recognition had kept Grace alive in 18 countries. She trusted it now. "No, ma'am," Grace said, "nothing else." She left the office, but not before pulling out her personal notebook and writing a single line. Vale dismissed safety concern. Pattern 7. At 0700, Grace was in the supply room organizing cleaning materials when Captain Alina Cross found her. Cross was 33, sharp-featured, and carried herself with the controlled intensity of someone who saw threats everywhere. As the base intelligence officer, paranoia was part of her job description. She had been at Fort Sentinel for 18 months and had been watching Grace Harding for at least 12 of them. "Mrs. Harding," Cross said, leaning against the doorframe, "I noticed you requisitioned weather tracking equipment last month. Barometer, anemometer, hygrometer. That's pretty sophisticated gear for floor maintenance." Grace continued stacking bottles of industrial cleaner. "Humidity affects floor wax, ma'am. Temperature changes cause expansion in the tile grout. Just trying to do the job properly." "Right," Cross said, not bothering to hide her skepticism. "Well, since you're so interested in weather patterns, thought you should know there's an unusual system moving in. Storm front from the north. Meteorology says it should hit around 1600 hours. 1547, Grace said. Cross stopped. "What?" Grace set down the bottle she was holding and looked directly at the intelligence officer. "The downdraft pattern in Copper Ridge Valley. Given the current pressure differential and the terrain channeling effect, the storm will hit the valley floor at 1547 local time. Wind shear will peak at 23 knots from the northwest. Visibility will drop below 100 meters. Duration approximately 18 minutes before the main cell passes." Cross stared at her. "That's extremely specific. The meteorology unit didn't give me anything close to that level of detail. How do you?" "Been here 3 years, ma'am," Grace said, returning to her work. "You learn patterns." "Patterns," Cross repeated slowly. She pulled out her phone and typed something. "Mrs. Harding, what exactly did you do before you came to Fort Sentinel?" "This and that," Grace said. "Maintenance work, contract jobs, nothing interesting." "Your employment file is remarkably thin for someone your age." "I'm not that interesting, ma'am." Cross studied her for another long moment, then left without another word. But Grace knew that interaction had just moved her up several notches on the intelligence officer's priority list. Cross was smart, observant, exactly the kind of person who might start asking the right questions. Grace would need to be more careful. At 0800, the mission briefing began in the Tactical Operations Center. Grace was in the corridor outside, mopping the floor with slow, methodical strokes. The door was closed, but doors were never as soundproof as people thought they were. Colonel James Briggs's voice carried clearly. "Copper Ridge, militia compound. Intelligence suggests a significant weapons cache. Your mission is reconnaissance only. No engagement unless absolutely necessary. QRF will be on standby at 30 minutes notice." Grace's mop strokes never changed rhythm, but her mind was mapping the terrain Briggs described. Copper Ridge Canyon, single-access road, high ground on 3 sides, natural choke point. Tactically, it was a nightmare for the attacking force and paradise for anyone setting an ambush. If she were planning to hit a SEAL team, that's exactly where she would do it. The briefing lasted 20 minutes. Grace was still mopping when the SEALs emerged. Harlow stopped when he saw her. "You again," he said. "Don't you ever sleep, Grandma?" "Night shift, Sergeant," Grace said, not looking up from her work. "Well, try not to flood the hallway while we're gone. Some of us have real work to do." Grace said nothing. Harlow and his team walked past, their boots tracking dirt across the floor she had just cleaned. She waited until they were out of sight, then abandoned her mop and moved quickly to a storage closet at the end of the corridor. The closet looked like any other maintenance space. Cleaning supplies, spare parts, buckets and mops, but Grace reached behind a shelf of industrial soap and pressed a hidden latch. A panel swung open, revealing a space barely large enough for a rifle case and a small backpack. The Remington 700 lay in its custom foam padding. Grace ran her fingers along the stock, checking for moisture, for any sign of degradation. The rifle was old, technically obsolete, and officially listed as destroyed in a warehouse fire 3 years ago. Grace had rebuilt it piece by piece, cannibalizing parts from a dozen different sources, adjusting the trigger pull to exactly 2.5 pounds, bedding the action until the barrel harmonics were perfect. This rifle had no serial number, no manufacturer, no history. It was a ghost just like her. Next to the rifle was a small wooden box. Grace opened it carefully. Inside, nestled in foam, were 20 bullets. Each one had been hand-loaded to her exact specifications. Sierra Match King bullets, federal brass. Hodgdon powder measured to within .1 grain, each bullet polished until it gleamed. Grace counted them, even though she knew exactly how many there were. 19 bullets in the main compartment. 1 bullet, slightly different in appearance, in a separate slot. She had made the 19th bullet 3 years ago, the day she arrived at Fort Sentinel, the day she started hunting the person who had killed her team. Grace closed the box without touching the bullets. Not yet, soon. She secured the panel and returned to her mopping. Just another janitor, just another invisible person doing invisible work. At 1300 hours, Grace was in the motor pool when the SEAL team arrived to collect their vehicles. She was under Humvee 6, her third vehicle inspection of the day, when she heard Harlow's voice. "You still here? Don't you have floors to mop?" Grace slid out from under the vehicle, her movements slow and careful. Harlow stood over her, his team gathering around the Humvees. "Just finishing the inspections, Sergeant," Grace said. "Wanted to make sure everything was ready for your patrol." "How thoughtful," Harlow said, his tone making it clear he thought it was anything but. "Well, we can take it from here. Try not to hurt yourself." Grace stood brushing dirt from her coveralls. She looked at Humvee 4, then at Harlow. For a moment she considered saying something, warning him. The stress fracture in 4's suspension was a ticking time bomb. If it failed at high speed, the vehicle could roll. She opened her mouth. Then she remembered the blood under the table, the pattern of dismissed safety reports, the encrypted communications on unauthorized frequencies, the fact that this patrol, this route, this timing had been planned for weeks, and someone had been feeding every detail to the militia groups in the mountains. If she warned them now, the trap wouldn't spring, the network wouldn't expose itself, the real mission would fail. So instead of warning him, Grace said, "Weather's turning, Sergeant. Storm hits at 1547. Your comms will drop when the electrical activity peaks." Harlow laughed. "Thanks for the forecast, Grandma. I'll be sure to pack an umbrella." "The Humvees," Grace continued, her voice flat. "Numbers 4 and 7. I reported stress fractures in the suspension. Master Chief Vale said you could handle it." Something changed in Harlow's expression. Not concern, just annoyance that she was still talking. "We'll be fine," he said. "SEALs can handle a little rough road. Maybe you should worry less about our vehicles and more about keeping the toilets clean." Grace held his gaze for exactly 2 seconds longer than a janitor should. Long enough that Harlow's smile faltered slightly. Long enough that he couldn't quite look away. "I'm sure you can, Sergeant Harlow," she said. Then she gathered her tools and walked away, feeling his eyes on her back the whole time. At 1400 hours, the convoy rolled out. 4 Humvees, 8 SEALs, 1 route. Zero chance they would arrive at Copper Ridge without incident. Grace watched from the observation tower. Through her binoculars, she tracked the convoy as it wound through the gates and onto the mountain road. But she wasn't watching the SEALs. She was watching the ridge lines, the approach roads, the positions where an ambush force would stage. And there, exactly where she expected, were 3 civilian pickup trucks moving on parallel courses. Timing, coordination, professional. This wasn't a random militia group. This was organized, funded, directed by someone with military training and inside knowledge. Someone on this base. Ahmed climbed the tower stairs and found her there. He said nothing at first, just stood next to her looking out at the mountains. "You seem worried, Mrs. Harding," he finally said in English. "Just watching the weather," Grace replied. Ahmed switched to Pashto, his voice soft. "You move like someone who has been in war." Grace turned to look at him, and for the first time in 3 years she answered in the same language. "So do you, Ahmed. That's why we're both here." Ahmed's eyes widened. He had suspected for 3 years, but this was confirmation. Grace Harding wasn't just a janitor. She was something else entirely. "The storm will be bad," Grace said, switching back to English. "You should go inside." She left the tower, leaving Ahmed staring after her. At 14:30, Grace went to the armory. Sergeant Davis was on duty, a junior enlisted soldier who had been at Fort Sentinel for 8 months. He was distracted by his phone, watching the drone feed of the SEAL convoy. "Forgot to restock cleaning supplies in here," Grace said. "Permission to enter." Davis barely looked up. Yeah, go ahead." Grace moved through the armory with the familiarity of someone who had been here many times, past the modern rifles, past the ammunition stores, to the back corner where obsolete equipment was kept. The Remington 700 was exactly where she had left it. She checked the serial number location. Still filed smooth, untraceable. She pulled the bolt, checked the chamber, worked the action. Smooth, perfect. From her pocket she removed the wooden box, opened it, counted the bullets one more time. 19 bullets for the mission. 1 bullet for justice. She loaded 19 rounds into the rifle's internal magazine. The 20th bullet, slightly different in weight and appearance, she left in the box. She placed the box on a high shelf, behind some cleaning supplies, where it would wait. Grace slung the rifle over her shoulder, covered it with a maintenance tarp, and walked out past Davis, who never looked up from his phone. She exited Fort Sentinel through a blind spot in the camera coverage. She had mapped every camera angle 6 months ago. 3 minutes later, she was in the wilderness, and no one had seen her leave. The climb to Ridge 447 was 2,000 feet of elevation gain over terrain that would challenge a healthy 20-year-old. Grace was 52, with nerve damage, shrapnel near her spine, and arthritis in both knees. She made it in 32 minutes. Every step was agony. Her left knee felt like someone was driving nails through the joint. The shrapnel shifted with each movement, sending electric shocks down her leg that made her vision blur. Her breathing came hard in the thin mountain air. But Grace had learned pain management in places where showing weakness meant death. She had walked for 43 days with a bullet wound in her shoulder and a broken rib. She had crawled 3 miles with a shattered ankle. This climb was nothing compared to what she had already survived. Halfway up she had to stop, not from exhaustion, from memory. The ridge line, the distant sound of gunfire, the smell of cordite and blood. She was back in the mountains outside Kandahar, watching through her scope as her team died one by one, unable to save them, unable to do anything but count the kills and survive. Grace pressed her forehead against the rock and forced herself to breathe. In for 4, hold for 7, out for 8. The memory receded, the present returned, she kept climbing. At the summit, she found her position. A natural depression in the rock that provided cover and a clear line of sight to Copper Ridge Canyon, 1,218 meters below. She had pre-ranged this position 6 weeks ago, had verified it twice since then. The numbers were carved into her memory. Grace set up the rifle with movements so practiced they were automatic, bipod deployed, scope covers off, elevation turret adjusted, windage calculated and dialed in. Then she pulled out a small waterproof notebook and a pencil. She wrote slowly, her handwriting neat despite the tremor in her hands. If you are reading this, I did not make it. My name is Grace Harding, Callsign Sparrow 6. This is my last mission. Not for orders, not for country. For the 5 who did not come home. She signed it with her old callsign, closed the notebook, and placed it under a rock where it would be found if she didn't return. Then Grace settled into position behind the rifle and waited. At 15:47, exactly as she had predicted, the storm hit Copper Ridge Canyon. The wind came first, a screaming gust that bent the trees and turned the air opaque with dust. Then the rain, hard and cold, reducing visibility to meters. The SEAL convoy slowed, then stopped at the canyon entrance. Tactically, it was the worst possible position, boxed in, limited visibility, no maneuver room. Exactly what Grace had known would happen. Through her scope, fighting the wind, she watched as the first RPG streaked out of the rocks and impacted the lead vehicle. Humvee 4, the one with the stress fracture she had reported. The suspension failed on impact and the vehicle rolled onto its side. The second RPG hit the rear vehicle, Humvee 7, same fracture, same failure. The convoy was boxed in. Grace's scope swept the ridge lines, counting, thermal signatures appearing through the rain, 43 hostiles, no 44, militia fighters with military-grade weapons moving with coordinated precision. This was not a random ambush. This was planned, professional, funded. And someone on her base had made it possible. Grace's crosshair found the first target, RPG gunner setting up for a third shot that would finish the middle vehicles. Range, 1,218 meters. Wind, 18 knots gusting. Rain reducing visibility. Temperature dropping. She had made harder shots. Grace's breathing slowed. In for 4, hold for 7, out for 8. At the pause between heartbeats at the moment of perfect stillness, her finger began its steady pressure on the trigger. But before she fired, she made a decision. She shifted her aim away from Harlow, who was pinned behind the burning Humvee. Shifted away from the easy kill shot that would end the man who had mocked her, bullied her, dismissed her. Instead, she targeted the RPG gunner. The man who was about to kill 8 Americans. Grace squeezed the trigger. The rifle spoke. 1,218 meters away, the RPG gunner's head snapped back. He fell, the rocket launcher tumbling from his hands. Grace worked the bolt. The spent casing ejected, and she caught it without thinking, muscle memory from 10,000 repetitions. She looked at the brass casing for 1 second. Whispered 1. Then she chambered the second round. Through the scope, she counted the remaining targets. 43 left. 18 bullets remaining in her rifle. Grace's lips moved, counting something only she understood. Then her breathing cycle began again. In for 4. Hold for 7. Out for 8. Fire. In the burning Humvee below, Harlow screamed into his radio. Contact. We are taking heavy fire from multiple directions. We need immediate support. In the command center back at Fort Sentinel, Colonel Briggs stared at the drone feed in horror. Get the QRF airborne now. 45 minutes to target, sir. They don't have 45 minutes. On Ridge 447, Grace Harding settled into the rhythm she had learned 20 years ago. The rhythm that had kept her alive through 18 deployments. The rhythm that had earned her a callsign and a reputation, and a place among the deadliest operators in American military history. 14 seconds between shots. Time enough for a full respiratory cycle. Time enough to let the barrel harmonics settle. Time enough to remember why she was here. Grace's finger found the trigger again. Her crosshair settled on the second target, a militia commander, identifiable by the way others looked to him for orders. She squeezed. The rifle spoke its second word. And in the valley below, Marcus Harlow, the man who had called her grandma and kicked over her mop bucket and treated her like she was invisible, began to realize that someone was saving his life. He just had no idea who. Or why. Or what it was going to cost him to learn the truth. The second militia fighter dropped 14 seconds after the first. Grace Harding worked the bolt with mechanical precision, the spent casing ejecting into her gloved hand. She placed it carefully next to the first. Two pieces of brass that represented 2 lives ended at extreme range in impossible conditions. The rain hammered against her position, the wind gusting hard enough to make the calculations complex, but not impossible. Never impossible. Through the scope, she watched the militia force react to the second kill. Confusion rippled through their positions. They had been in control 30 seconds ago, 8 American SEALs pinned in a perfect kill box, nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. Now their commander was dead and they couldn't identify where the shots were coming from. Grace had positioned herself 1,218 meters away for exactly this reason. At that range, in this weather, with the sound of thunder and gunfire echoing through the canyon, she was a ghost. The militia fighters were scanning the wrong ridge lines, looking for threats at 600 meters, maybe 800. Their training, such as it was, hadn't prepared them for someone who could reach out and touch them from over a kilometer away. In the command center at Fort Sentinel, every screen showed chaos. The main monitor displayed the drone's thermal feed, false color images of the firefight in Copper Ridge Canyon. Smaller screens showed communications logs, weather data, tactical overlays. And in the center of it all stood Colonel James Briggs, 58 years old, 2 tours in Iraq, 1 in Afghanistan, watching his SEAL team die in real time. "Sir, QRF is wheels up in 3 minutes, the operations officer reported. 3 minutes to launch, 42 minutes to target, Briggs said, his voice tight. Those boys will be dead in 10. On the main screen, thermal signatures bloomed and faded as both sides exchanged fire. The SEALs were good, their training evident in how they moved, how they covered each other, but they were outnumbered 5 to 1 and running low on ammunition. It was only a matter of time. Then one of the thermal signatures on the ridge line simply vanished. "What was that?" Briggs demanded. The drone operator, Specialist Blake, worked his controls. "Contact down, unknown cause. I didn't see any fire from our position." "Replay it." Blake scrubbed back through the footage. On the thermal display, a hostile signature stood in the open, weapon raised. Then, between one frame and the next, the signature's head disappeared and the body crumpled. "That's a headshot," the operations officer said. "At that range in this weather, that's over 1,000 meters. Who the hell is shooting? Briggs leaned closer to the screen. Pan the cameras. Find me that shooter. Blake swept the drone's optics across the surrounding ridges. Empty terrain, rain, wind-bent trees, nothing. Negative contact, sir. If there's a shooter out there, they're well concealed. 14 seconds later, another hostile dropped. There, Briggs pointed. Machine gun position, northeast corner. He just went down. Blake zoomed the camera. The thermal signature showed a body cooling, weapon abandoned. No other friendlies in range. No muzzle flash detected. Sir, I'm reading a possible thermal signature on Ridge 447, but it's faint. Could be atmospheric interference. Put it on screen. The image that appeared was barely there, a ghost of heat against the cold mountain stone. It could have been a person. Could have been a rock warmed by brief sunlight. Could have been sensor noise. But Briggs had spent 30 years learning to trust his instincts, and his instincts said someone was up on that ridge, shooting with surgical precision, turning the tide of a battle they should have lost. Who authorized sniper support? He asked. Silence from his staff. Anyone? Did we have a team positioned for Overwatch? Negative, sir, the operations officer said. All our sniper teams are accounted for. This isn't one of ours. On Ridge 447, Grace's breathing cycle continued its ancient rhythm. In for 4 counts, hold for 7, out for 8, at the pause, squeeze. The third shot took a spotter who was trying to coordinate fire. Range 1,340 meters, the target having moved since her last calculation. Wind had shifted 2 degrees. Grace adjusted her point of aim and fired. The bullet flew for just over 2 seconds before it found its mark. She worked the bolt, caught the casing, placed it with the others. 3, she whispered. Her hands were steady now, the tremor that plagued her daily life completely absent. This was what her body remembered. This was what 2 decades of training had carved into her nervous system. The shaking came from damaged nerves trying to function in normal life. But here, behind a rifle with a mission to complete, her body knew exactly what to do. In the canyon below, Marcus Harlow pressed his back against the overturned Humvee, bullets sparking off the armor plating inches from his head. His radio crackled with overlapping voices. Santos calling for ammunition. Drummond reporting his rifle jammed. Park screaming that they were surrounded. And then the incoming fire started to decrease. Not all at once, not obviously, but Harlow had been in enough firefights to recognize the pattern. The volume of fire was dropping. The coordination was breaking down. The militia fighters were starting to hesitate. Something's happening, Harlow said into his radio. They're backing off. They're not backing off, Jake Drummond replied from his position behind a rock. They're dying. Watch the northeast position. Harlow risked a glance over the Humvee's hood. He saw a militia fighter stand up with an RPG, aiming at their position. It was a perfect shot. At that range, with that weapon, there was no way to miss. The fighter's head snapped back. The RPG tumbled from his hands and rolled down the slope. Did you see that? Harlow breathed. Someone just dropped him. Not us, Santos said. We don't have anyone with a clean shot on that position. Felix Santos, despite the blood running down his arm from a grazing wound, had fought in enough battles to recognize professional shooting when he saw it. This wasn't luck. This wasn't spray and pray. This was precision work. We have a guardian angel, he said, and whoever they are, they're unfriendly to the guys shooting at us. In the command center, Captain Alina Cross stood apart from the main group, her tablet displaying information that no one else was seeing. While the rest of the staff focused on the tactical situation, Cross had been running a different kind of analysis. She had pulled up the base security footage from the past 6 hours. She had tracked every person who had left Fort Sentinel. She had cross-referenced vehicle assignments, gate logs, personnel rosters. And she had found a gap. At 14:43, there was a 3-minute period where the southeast perimeter camera had experienced what the log called atmospheric interference. In that exact 3-minute window, no thermal signatures were recorded leaving the base. But Cross had reviewed that same camera feed from the previous 6 months. Atmospheric interference had occurred exactly 0 times. Someone had left the base through a blind spot. Someone who knew the camera coverage well enough to avoid it. Someone who had reached Ridge 447 in time to provide overwatch for an operation they shouldn't have known about. Cross pulled up another file, one she had been building for 12 months. It was a simple spreadsheet. Column 1, date. Column 2, incident. Column 3, Grace Harding's location. 8 weeks ago, the armory had been entered after hours. No sign of forced entry. Nothing reported stolen. Grace Harding had been scheduled to clean the armory that night. 6 weeks ago, an encrypted transmission had been detected on an unauthorized frequency. Origin point traced to the maintenance building. Grace Harding's workstation was in the maintenance building. 4 weeks ago, someone had accessed classified patrol routes from an unsecured terminal in the motor pool. The terminal had been wiped, but the access time was 0320. Grace Harding started her shift at 0300. Individually, each incident was meaningless. Coincidence. But Cross had learned long ago that coincidence was just pattern recognition waiting to happen. She looked up at the main screen, at the faint thermal signature on Ridge 447, and made a decision. "Colonel," she said quietly, "I need to speak with you privately." Briggs didn't take his eyes off the screen. "Not now, Captain." "Sir, it's about the shooter." "That got his attention. You know who it is." "I have a theory, and if I'm right, we have a much bigger problem than this ambush." Grace's 4th shot took out a fighter attempting to flank the SEAL position from the west. 5th shot eliminated a spotter calling in coordinates. 6th shot destroyed a radio in the hands of someone trying to coordinate a withdrawal. She was selecting targets with careful deliberation now. Not just shooting whoever presented themselves, but choosing which kills would have the maximum tactical impact. Take out the leaders and the group loses direction. Take out the heavy weapons and they lose offensive capability. Take out the communications and they lose coordination. This was the art that separated shooters from snipers. Anyone could hit a target at range given enough training, but understanding which target to hit, and when, required a deeper knowledge of how humans fought and died. Grace had learned this art in a dozen countries whose names were still classified. She had learned it from instructors who appeared in no official records, and she had perfected it over 143 confirmed kills, though the real number was higher. Some kills you didn't confirm. Some kills you didn't talk about. Some kills you carried in silence. Shot 7 hit a fighter trying to rally the others. Shot 8 took out the last RPG team. Shot 9 eliminated a machine gunner who had found decent cover. 14 seconds between each shot. The rhythm was everything. It gave her time to breathe, time to calculate, time to let the rifle settle. But more than that, it was a promise. Lieutenant Marcus Hale had died on November 14, 2020. His daughter had been 14 months old. Grace had not been able to save him, had watched through her scope as he died, along with 4 others, in a firefight that should never have happened. 14 seconds between shots was her way of remembering. Every shot a prayer. Every kill a promise that their deaths would mean something. In the canyon, the militia force was breaking. It had taken exactly 9 shots over 126 seconds to turn a coordinated ambush into a rout. The fighters who remained were retreating, abandoning their positions, fleeing into the forest. Grace tracked one of them through her scope. Young man, maybe 25, running for his life. She had a clear shot. The wind had dropped. Range was decreasing as he fled. It would be easy. She let him go. Her mission wasn't to kill every hostile. Her mission was to save 8 Americans and expose the network that had tried to kill them. Shooting runners wouldn't accomplish either goal. She shifted her aim to a different target. A man who wasn't running. A man who was moving with purpose, trying to organize a defensive withdrawal. The one wearing what looked like a U.S. Army jacket. Grace zoomed her scope. The jacket was genuine military issue. And there on the shoulder, barely visible through the rain, was a patch she recognized. Fort Sentinel. This man was wearing equipment that should only be available on her base, which meant he had either stolen it, bought it from someone on base, or he was military himself. Grace made a decision. She fired. But not at the man. She put the bullet into the dirt 3 inches from his boots. The impact made him jump, made him look up toward the ridge where the shot had come from. For exactly 2 seconds, Grace let him see her position. Let him see the muzzle flash. Let him see that he had been spared deliberately. Then she fired again, this time at a fighter who was still actively engaging the SEALs. The man in the Fort Sentinel jacket ran, but Grace had already memorized his face. In the command center, the mood had shifted from despair to confusion to cautious hope. The hostile contacts were withdrawing. The SEAL team was still intact. The QRF was inbound but no longer desperately needed. "Sir, all hostiles are retreating," Blake reported. "SEAL Team 9 is securing their perimeter." Briggs keyed his microphone. "Harlow, this is Sentinel Actual. What's your status?" Harlow's voice came back, breathless but alive. 8 souls, all breathing. Santos has a gunshot wound to the arm, but he'll make it. 2 vehicles destroyed. We're combat ineffective but intact. Copy that. QRF will extract you in 30 minutes. Who was providing sniper support? Unknown, sir. Whoever they were, they just saved our lives. 18 shots I counted. Maybe 19. Every single one a hit. I've never seen shooting like that. Did you get eyes on the shooter? Negative, they were too far out. But sir, whoever that was, they're not just good. They're legendary. Cross approached Briggs with her tablet. "Colonel, I need to show you something." Briggs took the device. On the screen was a photograph from a personnel file. Grace Harding, 52 years old, employed as night shift maintenance and equipment technician. The photo showed a tired-looking woman with gray hair and weathered features. She looked like somebody's grandmother. "This is our janitor," Briggs said. "What about her?" "Sir, how much do you know about her background?" "Not much. She was hired through the Veteran Disability Program. Quiet, keeps to herself, does good work." Cross swiped to the next screen. Her employment file is almost empty. 3 years at Fort Sentinel. Before that, contract maintenance work at various bases, but I can't verify any of it. Before 2021, Grace Harding doesn't exist in any database I can access. So she's private, some people are. "Colonel, this morning at 0700, Mrs. Harding gave me a weather prediction accurate to the minute. She predicted the Copper Ridge downdraft to within 2 minutes and the wind speed to within 3 knots. No instruments, no computer models. She just knew." Briggs was starting to pay attention. "Go on." At 0500, she filed a safety report about stress fractures in 2 Humvees. Those exact two vehicles failed during the ambush. Master Chief Vale dismissed her report. Vale has been dismissing a lot of reports lately, Briggs said slowly. 7 in the past 8 weeks, sir. All related to SEAL operations, all from Grace Harding, and in every case, Mrs. Harding's concerns turned out to be valid. Cross pulled up the security footage gap. At 1443, someone left this base through a camera blind spot. Someone who knew our coverage well enough to avoid detection. I've checked the timing. If someone left at 1443 and moved fast, they could reach Ridge 447 by 1530, just in time to provide overwatch. You think our janitor is a sniper? Sir, I think our janitor is the sniper, and I think she's been watching our base for a lot longer than 3 years. Briggs stared at the photograph of Grace Harding, the tired eyes, the gray hair, the hands that trembled when she carried her cleaning supplies. Pull her service record, the real one. I can't, sir. It's classified above my level. I tried 3 different databases. Everything about Grace Harding prior to 2021 is locked behind security I don't have clearance for. How high? Special Access Program level, sir. The kind of clearance reserved for black operations and covert assets. Briggs felt cold certainty settling in his gut. Get me Ahmed Rashid, now. On Ridge 447, Grace was packing her equipment. The rifle went back in its bag. The spent casings went in her pocket, all 18 of them. She performed a quick police of the area, making sure she left no trace, no evidence, nothing that would identify her. Then she noticed the 19th casing was missing. Grace frowned. She had fired 18 shots. She always caught her brass. It was discipline drilled into her over 2 decades, but she counted the casings in her hand 3 times. 18. She searched the area around her position. Nothing. The 19th casing had vanished. Or she had miscounted. Grace's mind was already elsewhere, already planning the descent, the return to base, the continuation of her cover. She dismissed the missing casing as an error in her count and began the climb down. Every step down was harder than the climb up. Her knees screamed. The shrapnel near her spine ground against nerve endings with each jarring impact. Halfway down, she had to stop and rest, her hands shaking so badly she couldn't grip the rocks. Grace pulled out her pill bottle. Empty. She had run out of pain medication 3 days ago and hadn't refilled the prescription because that would mean going to the base clinic, and the base clinic kept records, and records created patterns. She forced herself to breathe through the pain, forced her hands to grip, forced her legs to move. The memory came unbidden. Another mountain, another descent. November of 2020, 43 days behind enemy lines, walking out of hostile territory with a bullet wound in her shoulder and broken ribs, and the weight of 5 deaths on her conscience. A voice in her memory, warm, patient, Lieutenant Marcus Hale. Pain is just information, Sparrow. Your body is telling you something. Acknowledge it, then ignore it and do your job. Easy for you to say, Hale. You got shot 3 times last month and you're still faster than me. That was before I had a kid. Fatherhood has slowed me down. In another year, you'll be running circles around me. Except there hadn't been another year. 3 weeks after that conversation, Hale had died with his team, and Grace had spent 43 days walking out alone. Grace opened her eyes. She was sitting on the mountainside, tears mixing with rain on her face. She wiped them away roughly and stood. No time for ghosts, no time for grief, only mission. She reached Fort Sentinel at 1700 hours. The base was on heightened alert, security doubled, everyone who wasn't essential confined to quarters. Grace slipped through the same blind spot she had used to leave, returned the rifle to its hiding place in the armory, and was back in the motor pool by 17:15. She changed into her janitor coveralls, washed the gun oil from her hands, pulled her hair back into its habitual bun. When she looked in the mirror, she saw exactly what she wanted to see. A tired woman in her 50s, invisible, harmless. Grace sat at her workbench and pulled out the 18 brass casings. She lined them up in a neat row, each one representing a life taken, a seal saved, a step closer to the truth. Then she heard voices approaching. Grace swept the casings into her pocket and picked up a wrench, pretending to work on a piece of equipment. The motor pool door slammed open and suddenly the space was full of people. Harlow, Drummond, Santos with his arm bandaged, Park, all of SEAL Team 9 just extracted from Copper Ridge, still in their combat gear, staring at her. "Was it you?" Harlow asked. No preamble, no explanation, just the question. Grace looked up slowly, her face showing nothing but mild confusion. "I'm sorry, Sergeant." "The shooter on Ridge 447, the one who saved our lives, was it you?" Grace set down her wrench with exaggerated care. "I've been here all afternoon, Sergeant, working on vehicle maintenance. You can check the security logs if you'd like." Drummond stepped forward, phone in hand. "We will, because our guardian angel out there, they made shots that maybe 5 people in the world can make, in whether that would make most snipers pack up and go home, from a range that requires mathematics most people can't do in their head." "And you think I'm capable of that?" Grace asked, injecting just the right note of disbelief into her voice. "This morning you could barely hold a coffee cup without shaking," Santos said. "But someone on that ridge was steady as a rock, someone who knew exactly where we'd be, someone who had pre-positioned to provide overwatch." Grace met his eyes. "I'm flattered that you think I have those skills, Petty Officer Santos, but I'm just a janitor." "Bullshit," Harlow said, his voice rising. "You warned me about the storm, warned me about the Humvees. You knew something was wrong." "I filed a safety report that was dismissed. I mentioned the weather because I watch patterns. That doesn't make me a sniper." Park had been quiet, but now he spoke. "Show us your hands." "Excuse me." "Your hands, show them to us." Grace held out her hands. They trembled visibly, the essential tremor that had been her constant companion since the nerve damage in her shoulder. The tremor that made people underestimate her. The tremor that disappeared only when she was behind a rifle. "I don't know what you think you saw out there," Grace said quietly. "But whoever saved you, it wasn't someone with hands like these." Harlow stared at her shaking hands. The doubt was visible on his face now. Maybe they were wrong. Maybe the janitor was just a janitor. Then Grace made a mistake. She reached into her pocket for a rag to wipe her hands, and one of the brass casings fell out, bouncing once on the concrete floor before rolling to a stop at Harlow's feet. The SEAL bent and picked it up, turned it over in his hands. Read the caliber stamp. .308 Winchester, still warm. Harlow looked from the casing to Grace. Grace looked back, her face calm, but inside she was calculating. How much to admit, how much to deny, how to control the revelation. She made her decision. Grace pulled the rest of the casings from her pocket and placed them on the workbench. 1, 2, 3. She counted them out until there were 18 pieces of brass arranged in a neat line. 19, she said softly. "What?" Harlow whispered. "You said 18 shots. It was 19. 18 kills, 1 message." She reached into a different pocket and pulled out a 19th casing, different from the others. She placed it at the end of the line. Santos's legs gave out and he sat down hard on a nearby stool. Drummond's phone slipped from his fingers. Park just stared, unable to process what he was seeing. Harlow looked at the casings, then at Grace. How? How did the janitor make shots that would challenge the best snipers in the world? Grace asked. How did the woman who can barely climb stairs make it to Ridge 447 in time? How did someone with shaking hands put 18 rounds on target without a single miss? She stood, her movement still slow, still careful, but somehow different. The hesitancy was gone, the shuffle replaced by something more controlled. She didn't, Grace said. The janitor didn't make those shots. The door opened again. Colonel Briggs entered, followed by Captain Cross and Ahmed Rashid. Briggs took one look at the brass casings on the workbench and nodded slowly. "Everyone out except Harding," he said. "Sir, we deserve to know," Harlow started. "You'll get answers, Sergeant, but first I need them. Out now." The SEALs filed out reluctantly, Harlow casting one last look at Grace before the door closed. Briggs approached the workbench. He didn't touch the casings, just studied them. 18 kills at extreme range in combat conditions. I've seen a lot of shooters in my career, Mrs. Harding. None of them could do what you did today. Grace said nothing. Captain Cross has been digging into your background, or trying to. Everything before 2021 is classified above her clearance. Above mine too, apparently. Briggs turned to look at her. So I made some calls, reached out to some people I know at Special Operations Command. Most of them wouldn't talk to me, but one did, old friend from my Ranger days. He's high enough up the chain to see certain files. Briggs pulled out his phone and laid it on the workbench next to the casings. On the screen was a photograph. 6 people in combat gear, faces partially obscured, standing in front of a helicopter. The photo quality was poor, deliberately degraded, but one figure was visible enough to recognize. A woman with green eyes, 20 years younger, holding a Barrett .50 caliber rifle like it weighed nothing. Operation Nightfall, Briggs said. November 14, 2020. 6 Delta Force operators inserted into hostile territory based on intelligence that turned out to be fatally flawed. 5 killed in the first 17 minutes. 1 survived. He pulled up another document. Callsign, Sparrow 6. Real name, Captain Grace Marie Harding. Confirmed kills, 143. Actual number estimated much higher. Spent 43 days behind enemy lines conducting solo escape and evasion. 89 additional confirmed kills during exfiltration. Refused psychological treatment at Walter Reed Medical Center. Disappeared from custody December 2020. Status: missing in action, presumed killed in action. Briggs looked up from the phone. "Except you're not dead. You've been here 3 years, mopping floors and fixing vehicles while we treated you like you were invisible." Grace finally spoke. "I was invisible, that was the point." "Why?" Cross asked from her position by the door. "Why hide? Why let people like Harlow mock you? Why not just disappear somewhere else?" "Because I was hunting someone," Grace said simply. "And you can't hunt if your prey knows you're there." Ahmed stepped forward. "Colonel, I need to tell you something. In 2019, I was an interpreter for Delta Force operations in Kandahar province. I worked with Sparrow team. I worked with her." He looked at Grace. "Lieutenant Hale saved my family, got them refugee status when the Taliban marked them for death. I owe him everything. When Mrs. Harding arrived at this base, I recognized her immediately. I kept her secret because I knew she was here for a reason." "What reason?" Briggs demanded. Grace walked to her locker. She pulled out a small notebook, the pages filled with dates, times, observations. 7 weeks ago, Sergeant Davis accessed the armory after hours. He took nothing, but he photographed classified weapons inventories. 5 weeks ago, Specialist Kowalski transmitted encrypted data on an unauthorized frequency. 3 weeks ago, Lieutenant Travis used an unsecured terminal to access SEAL patrol routes. She set the notebook on the workbench. Someone on this base has been feeding intelligence to militia groups, not random information, precise targeting data, movement schedules, equipment loadouts. Today's ambush required insider knowledge of Harlow's route, his timing, his quick reaction force response window. "That's a serious accusation," Briggs said. "It's not an accusation. It's a pattern I've been tracking for 8 months." Grace opened the notebook to a specific page. "The person coordinating all of this has been very careful, using cutouts, compartmentalized information, but they made mistakes, small ones, dismissed safety reports that would have changed patrol routes, reassigned personnel to create vulnerabilities. And this morning I saw fresh blood under Harlow's table, combat fresh. But Harlow hasn't been in combat in weeks." Cross pulled out her tablet, already searching. "Blood testing. Davis had a hand injury last week, cut himself on equipment." "Check the injury report," Grace said. Cross pulled it up. "Says here he cut himself on a metal edge, required 3 stitches. She looked up. "That would produce the blood pattern you described." "Davis was in the militia planning meeting," Grace said. "He injured himself getting into position on the ridge. Some of his blood dripped at the staging area. He came back to base, cleaned the wound, but didn't notice he'd tracked blood into the mess hall." Briggs was on his radio immediately. "Security, I need Sergeant Davis detained. Now." "Sir, Davis is not in his quarters. He left the base 40 minutes ago. Gate log shows he signed out for emergency family leave." "Which is unusual," Cross said, checking her tablet, "because Davis has no family in Montana. His next of kin are all in Ohio." The lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in 3 seconds later, bathing everything in red. But in those 3 seconds of darkness, Grace moved. She pulled Harlow's sidearm from his holster as she dragged him down, her movements smooth and practiced despite the pain in her knees. Gunfire erupted outside the motor pool. Bullets punched through the thin metal walls, sparking off equipment. Grace returned fire through the window, 3 controlled shots into the darkness. She couldn't see her targets, but she could calculate where they had to be based on muzzle flash, angle of incoming fire, and basic geometry. 3 shots, 3 different directions. Then she rolled left, pulling Briggs down as bullets tore through the space where she had been standing. "Stay down," she said, her voice completely different now. Not janitor meek, command voice. The voice of someone who had led soldiers in combat. The firing stopped. Grace rose slowly, weapon ready, scanning the darkness beyond the windows. "Lights," she called. "Someone get lights." Cross found a flashlight. In its beam they saw 3 bodies outside. Sergeant Davis, shoulder wound, Specialist Kowalski, leg wound, and a third person face down in the dirt, not moving. Grace walked to the door, weapon still ready, and kicked it open. She moved to the third body and rolled it over. Lieutenant Michael Travis, logistics officer, 2 years at Fort Sentinel, dead from a shot to center mass. "I was aiming for his weapon," Grace said quietly. "He moved at the last second." Briggs keyed his radio. "Medical to motor pool, security to perimeter. We have 3 hostile contacts down, 1 KIA." Grace stood over Travis's body, her face expressionless. This was the part of combat they didn't show in the recruitment videos. The part where you killed someone and had to keep functioning because the mission wasn't over. She had done this 144 times now. It never got easier. "Secure Davis and Kowalski," Briggs ordered. "I want them in interrogation in 15 minutes. Ahmed approached Grace. "Are you injured?" "No. I meant from earlier, the climb, the shooting. Grace looked at him, and for a moment the mask slipped. Ahmed saw the pain in her eyes, the exhaustion, the weight of carrying so much alone for so long. "I'll manage," she said. Briggs's phone buzzed. He looked at it and his face went pale. "Grace, you need to see this." He showed her the screen, an encrypted message from an unknown number. "Phoenix Protocol Phase 3 authorized. Eliminate Raven Prime. 12 hours." Grace stared at the message. Phoenix Protocol. The words she had been waiting 3 years to see. "What is Phoenix Protocol?" Cross asked. Grace looked at Briggs, then at the others. She made a decision about how much truth to tell. "I didn't break my rule to save you, Sergeant Harlow," she said, even though he wasn't in the room. She was speaking to the door, to the base, to the mission that had consumed 3 years of her life. "I was ordered to." She picked up one of the brass casings from the workbench. "I'm not retired, I'm not hiding, I'm operational, and SEAL Team 9 was never the mission. You were the bait." Grace set the casing down with a soft click that sounded loud in the sudden silence. "Someone on this base sold intelligence that got my team killed in 2020. That same person has been running a domestic terrorism network, building militia groups, preparing for something bigger. Phoenix Protocol has been tracking them for 18 months. My mission was to get deep inside their operation, identify all the players, and wait for them to expose themselves. Today's ambush was allowed to happen. The intelligence leak was allowed to continue. The militia was allowed to believe they could kill 8 American SEALs and get away with it. Because when they tried, every phone call, every encrypted message, every vehicle movement exposed the network. Briggs processed this. You used my men as bait. Phoenix Protocol did. I just made sure they survived. Who authorized this operation? Grace pulled out her encrypted phone and showed him the message. I report to someone so far up the chain of command that you've never heard of their office. This operation has been running since the day I disappeared from Walter Reed, and it ends in 12 hours. Ends how? We eliminate Raven Prime, the person who killed my team, the person who's been coordinating everything. Cross was scanning through files on her tablet. Davis, Kowalski, and Travis are 3 parts of the network, but you said there were more. Who else? Grace walked to a whiteboard and picked up a marker. She wrote quickly, her handwriting neat despite her trembling hands. Requires senior leadership, access to classified patrol routes, authority to dismiss safety reports, ability to reassign personnel. She stepped back. Only 4 people on this base have all of those capabilities. She pointed at Briggs, you, Colonel. At Cross, you, Captain. At the empty space where someone should be standing, Master Chief Patricia Vale. And me, Grace finished. One of us is Raven Prime. The silence that followed was absolute. Then Briggs spoke, his voice dangerously quiet. You suspect me of treason. I suspect everyone until the evidence proves otherwise. It's why I'm still alive. Cross pulled up Vale's file. Master Chief Vale has been at Fort Sentinel for 4 years. She has access to everything, and she's the one who dismissed all 7 of your safety reports. Grace nodded. She's also the one who was on the planning team for Operation Nightfall. She had access to our insertion routes, our objectives, our extraction coordinates. The implications hung in the air like a physical weight. Ahmed spoke softly. If Master Chief Vale betrayed Sparrow Team, she's been here the same amount of time as you, watching, making sure you stayed quiet. Where is she now? Grace asked. Briggs checked his radio. Vale, this is Sentinel Actual, report. Silence. Master Chief Vale respond. Nothing. Cross was already pulling up security footage. Last recorded sighting was 1700 hours. She left the command center and walked toward the old ammunition bunker on the north perimeter. That bunker's been decommissioned for years, Briggs said. It's also the one place on base with no camera coverage, Cross replied. Grace was already moving toward the door. She has the 19th bullet. What? Briggs called after her. Grace pulled out her brass casings and counted them again. I caught 18 casings on Ridge 447. I thought I miscounted, but I didn't. Someone took the 19th casing while I was shooting. Vale was the only person who knew I'd be there. She took it as a message. What message? Grace opened the door. That she's ready for me. One bullet, one shot, her or me. Behind them, Harlow had been listening through the door. He pushed it open now. I'm going with you. No. Those were my men she used as bait. I have just as much right. Grace turned to face him, and Harlow took an involuntary step back. The woman looking at him was not the janitor he had mocked. This was someone else entirely. Someone who had killed 144 people and was about to make it 145. This isn't about rights, Sergeant. This is about who can make the shot when it matters. Can you? Harlow wanted to argue, wanted to assert his authority, his training, his SEAL pride. But he looked into her eyes and knew the truth. Whatever he was, whatever training he had, she was something different. Something forged in fires he couldn't imagine. No, he finally said. Grace nodded once. Then stay here, protect the colonel. When this is over, I'll explain everything. And if you don't come back. Grace pulled out the Remington 700 from its hiding place one more time. She loaded a single round into the chamber. The last bullet from her personal stash, the one she had made 3 years ago specifically for this moment. If I don't come back, tell Hale's daughter that I tried. Tell her that I kept my promise to avenge her father. Tell her that some debts can only be paid in blood. She walked toward the door, rifle in hand, moving with purpose despite the pain that made every step agony. Ahmed stopped her one more time. He pressed something into her hand, a photograph. 6 people in combat gear, alive and smiling. Sparrow team before the mission that killed them. Grace at one end, Lieutenant Marcus Hale at the other, his arm around her shoulders. Hale told me once, Ahmed said quietly. We fight so others don't have to. Don't become what you're hunting, Grace. Grace looked at the photograph, at Hale's face, at the team that had been her family, at the life she had lost. She pocketed the photo. I'll try, she said. Then Grace Harding walked out into the Montana night, carrying a rifle with one bullet, going to meet the woman who had destroyed her life. Behind her in the motor pool, 18 brass casings sat in a neat row on the workbench, waiting to see if they would be joined by a 19th. Or if Grace Harding would finally join the team she had never stopped mourning. The ammunition bunker stood at the northern edge of Fort Sentinel like a relic from a different war. Built during the Cold War when the threat of nuclear annihilation felt real enough to touch, it had been decommissioned in the 90s and left to decay. Concrete walls 3 feet thick, steel door rusted at the hinges. No windows, no cameras, no witnesses. The perfect place for secrets to die. Grace Harding approached the bunker with the Remington 700 held at low ready, moving through the darkness with practiced efficiency despite the pain that shot through her knee with every step. The Montana night was cold enough to see her breath, clear enough to count stars, quiet enough to hear her own heartbeat. She had been in worse situations. Kandahar province with a bullet in her shoulder and enemies on 3 sides. The Hindu Kush mountains with broken ribs and 40 miles to walk. The Syrian desert with no water and no extraction plan. She had survived all of those through a combination of skill, will, and the refusal to surrender. But this was different. This was personal. Through the rifle's scope, Grace scanned the bunker entrance. No movement, no thermal signature, but she knew Vale was inside. Knew it with the certainty that came from hunting someone for 3 years, learning their patterns, understanding how they thought. Vale would be waiting in the dark, rifle ready, one bullet chambered, the same terms Grace had, one shot, winner lives, loser becomes another name on the wall of the fallen. Grace's encrypted phone buzzed once. A message from Phoenix Actual, the handler whose real name she had never learned, whose face she had never seen, whose voice existed only as text on a screen. Vale is confirmed Raven Prime. Authorization for termination granted. Rules of engagement, your discretion. Grace typed back with one hand, never taking her eyes off the bunker. Understood, going dark. She powered off the phone and dropped it in the dirt. No communications from here on. No backup. No witnesses. Just 2 women who had trained in the same methods, learned from the same instructors, and taken very different paths. Grace moved to the bunker door. It was slightly ajar, an invitation. She could circle around, find another entry point, try to gain tactical advantage. But that wasn't why she was here. This wasn't about tactics. This was about facing the person who had killed her team, looking them in the eyes and settling a debt that was 3 years overdue. She pushed the door open with her boot and stepped inside. The darkness was absolute. Grace let the door close behind her, cutting off even the starlight, and stood perfectly still, listening, breathing, waiting for her eyes to adjust to the absence of light. Vale's voice came from somewhere ahead, echoing off concrete walls in a way that made it impossible to locate precisely. I was wondering when you would figure it out, Sparrow. Took you long enough. Grace said nothing. Speaking would give away her position. She moved left, slow steps, feeling ahead with her boot before committing weight. The bunker was large, maybe 40 feet across, pillars supporting the ceiling at regular intervals. Plenty of cover, plenty of places for a trap. 3 years, Vale continued, her voice moving now, circling. You've been here 3 years, mopping floors, fixing vehicles, playing the invisible woman. All that time I was watching, waiting to see if the real Sparrow 6 was still in there or if Grace Harding had given up. Grace's eyes were adjusting. She could make out shapes now. The pillars, equipment crates stacked against walls, the faint outline of someone moving on the far side of the bunker. I couldn't let you stay invisible forever, Vale said. Had to prod you, push you, see if you would break cover, so I set up today's ambush. Fed the militia everything they needed, made it impossible for those SEALs to survive without help. Grace circled right, keeping a pillar between herself and Vale's voice. Her rifle was ready, but she didn't aim. Not yet. In this darkness, shooting without a clear target would just waste her one bullet. And you came through, Vale said, and there was something almost like pride in her voice. 18 shots, 18 kills. The Sparrow 6 I trained is still alive under all that gray hair and those shaking hands. Grace's finger touched the trigger lightly, 2 pounds of pressure. She needed 3 more to fire, but she forced herself to wait, to listen, to learn. You want to know why? Vale asked. Why I sold out Sparrow team? Why I sent 6 of the best operators in Delta Force into a kill box? Grace did want to know, had spent 3 years wanting to know, but she stayed silent. Because they were getting close, Vale said. Your team was hunting a domestic terrorism network, getting too close to the truth, too close to me. So I fed them bad intelligence, told them the target was lightly defended, made sure they walked into 300 Taliban fighters. The admission hung in the darkness like poison gas. I watched the whole thing from the TOC, Vale continued. Watched Hale die first. Watched Martinez try to save him and get cut down. Watched Chen and Rodriguez and Kim die one by one. And I watched you, Sparrow, on that ridge, making impossible shots, trying to save them, but you couldn't, could you? Grace's hands were shaking now, not from nerve damage, from rage. You were supposed to die with them, Vale said. The Taliban had orders to make sure no one walked out, but you survived. 43 days behind enemy lines. 89 kills during exfiltration. You became a legend. Grace heard the sound of a rifle bolt working. Vale was moving again, repositioning. When you disappeared from Walter Reed, I thought you were done. Broken, finished. But then Phoenix Protocol activated and I realized. Someone knew, someone suspected, so I volunteered for Fort Sentinel, kept you close, made sure you stayed quiet. I wasn't quiet, Grace said, finally breaking her silence. I was gathering evidence. The sound of her voice revealed her position. Grace moved immediately, 3 fast steps to a new location, knowing Vale would have tracked the sound. A muzzle flash lit the darkness. The shot went wide, sparking off concrete where Grace had been standing 2 seconds earlier. Grace didn't return fire. Vale had just wasted her 1 bullet. Except the rifle bolt worked again, the sound of another round being chambered. Did you really think I'd only bring 1 bullet? Vale asked, and Grace could hear the smile in her voice. I taught you better than that, Sparrow. Grace's tactical situation had just changed completely. She had 1 bullet. Vale had at least 2, maybe more. The terms she thought governed this fight were a lie. She needed to change the equation. Grace slung her rifle and drew the Glock she had taken from Harlow's holster earlier. 15 rounds, better odds, but the pistol was useless at range in this darkness. She would need to get close. She moved deeper into the bunker, using the pillars for cover, her boots silent on the concrete floor. Vale was somewhere ahead, listening for her, waiting for another chance to shoot. You know what the worst part was? Vale asked, still talking, still moving. Watching you every day for 3 years, watching Harlow and his team mock you, kick your mop bucket, treat you like you were nothing, and you just took it. The Great Sparrow 6 reduced to cleaning toilets. Grace found a position behind a large equipment crate. She pulled out her pocket flashlight, the small UV penlight she used for blood detection. Not much light, but enough. I almost felt sorry for you, Vale continued. Almost, but then today happened and I remembered. You're not broken, you're just patient, and patient people are the most dangerous kind. Grace threw the flashlight across the bunker. It clattered against the far wall, beam pointing away from her position. Vale's rifle barked twice, both shots toward the sound. But Grace was already moving, using the muzzle flash to locate Vale's exact position. She raised the Glock and fired 3 rounds in rapid succession. Not aimed shots, just suppressing fire to make Vale move, to push her, to control the engagement. Vale dove behind a pillar. Grace advanced, closing the distance, the Glock tracking ready. You always were aggressive, Vale called out. Hale tried to teach you patience, but you never learned. Always had to be in the fight, always had to be moving forward. Hale taught me plenty, Grace said, her voice cold. He taught me that honor matters, that loyalty matters, that you protect your team even if it costs you everything. She fired twice more, forcing Vale to stay behind cover. The shots echoed like thunder in the enclosed space. Honor, Vale laughed. You want to talk about honor? I've been running Phoenix Protocol for 18 months, building the case against domestic terrorism. using every resource at my disposal. Today, we dismantled 47 terror cells across 8 states. We saved lives, Sparrow, hundreds of lives. You killed 5 operators to do it. Necessary casualties, the mission required. Grace fired 3 more shots, cutting off Vale's justification. Don't you dare call them that. Hale, Martinez, Chen, Rodriguez, Kim, say their names. Silence from behind the pillar. Say their names, Grace repeated, her voice shaking with emotion. You don't get to reduce them to casualties. They were people. They had families. Hale had a daughter he'll never see grow up. You took that from him, from all of them. War requires hard choices, Vale said. No, murder requires hard choices. War requires honor. Grace emptied the Glock's magazine, 9 shots hammering into the pillar, chipping concrete, creating dust clouds. She dropped the empty magazine and reloaded, movements automatic despite her trembling hands. Then she heard something that made her blood run cold. Vale's laughter. You're out of position, Sparrow. Too aggressive. Too emotional. You've given up the high ground and now you're stuck in close quarters with limited ammunition and no exit strategy. Grace realized Vale was right. She had pushed too hard, let anger override tactics. She was in the center of the bunker now with Vale between her and the door. The student finally made a mistake, Vale said. After all these years, all that training, you let your emotions compromise your judgment. Grace backed toward the wall, trying to regain some tactical advantage. Her knee chose that moment to give out, the pain overwhelming, and she stumbled. Vale's rifle cracked. The bullet passed so close to Grace's head she felt the pressure wave. She dropped flat and rolled behind another pillar, breathing hard, knee screaming. I taught you better, Vale said, approaching now confident. Pain is just information. Acknowledge it and keep fighting. Those were Hale's words. Hearing them from Vale's mouth felt like a violation. Grace pulled herself up, using the pillar for support. She checked her remaining ammunition. 12 rounds in the Glock. The Remington 700 with its single bullet still slung across her back. 1 bullet she had made specifically for this moment, for this person, for this choice. I could have killed you 100 times over the past 3 years, Vale said, circling now, her footsteps echoing. In your sleep, during your shifts, made it look like an accident, but I wanted you to know. Wanted you to understand why Sparrow team died. Wanted you to realize that in the end I won. Grace's hand moved to the Remington. Slowly, carefully, she unslung it and set the Glock aside. Still carrying that old rifle? Vale asked. Sentimental. I taught you that sentimentality gets you killed. You taught me a lot of things, Grace said, working the rifle's bolt, chambering the last round. Most of them were lies. She stepped out from behind the pillar. Vale stood 40 feet away, her own rifle raised and ready. In the dim light filtering through cracks in the bunker ceiling, Grace could finally see her clearly. Master Chief Patricia Vale, 28 years of service, decorated veteran, traitor. 1 bullet, Vale asked, seeing Grace's rifle. Against my full magazine, those are bad odds. I only need 1, Grace said, if I make it count. They stood facing each other, 2 snipers who had trained in the same doctrine, learned from the same instructors, and ended up on opposite sides of an unbridgeable divide. You're going to try for a headshot, Vale said, analyzing Grace's stance, her grip, her breathing. Center mass is too risky with body armor. You'll aim for the cranial ocular cavity. It's what I taught you. Is it? I know everything you know, Sparrow. Every technique, every trick, every pattern. You can't surprise me. Grace's breathing steadied, in for 4 counts, hold for 7, out for 8. But you made one mistake, Grace said at the pause between heartbeats. What mistake? You assumed the rifle was loaded. Grace squeezed the trigger. The firing pin fell. The primer ignited. But instead of the familiar crack of a bullet leaving the barrel, there was only a dull pop. A misfire. The bullet Grace had loaded that morning, the 20th bullet from her custom box, the one she had kept separate from the others. It was a dud, deliberately made with insufficient powder, a training round designed to create sound and recoil but no projectile. Vale's face showed confusion for exactly 1 second, then understanding, then rage. You tricked me. Grace was already moving, dropping the useless rifle and diving for the Glock she had left on the floor. Her hands closed around it as Vale's rifle barked, the bullet striking concrete where Grace had been standing. Grace rolled, came up on one knee, ignored the pain and fired. But not at Vale. She aimed at Vale's rifle at the barrel at the action. The Glock's bullet struck metal and the rifle exploded in Vale's hands, the barrel bursting, the chamber rupturing, hot gas and metal fragments shredding Vale's grip. Vale screamed and dropped the destroyed weapon, her hands torn and bleeding. Grace stood slowly, Glock aimed at center mass, finger on trigger. 11 rounds remaining. Vale was disarmed, injured, helpless. One squeeze and it would be over. Justice for Hale, for Martinez, for Chen and Rodriguez and Kim, for 3 years of hiding and suffering and waiting. Grace's finger tightened. Then stopped. Do it, Vale spat, cradling her destroyed hands. Finish it, avenge your team. Grace lowered the weapon slightly, not holstering it, not surrendering, just lowering it enough to think instead of react. That's what you want, she said slowly. You want me to execute you, make it quick, clean, give you a warrior's death. I earned it. No, Grace said, you betrayed it. She pulled out the photograph Ahmed had given her. 6 people in combat gear, alive and smiling. Sparrow team before the mission that killed them. Grace held it so Vale could see. Lieutenant Hale told me once, we fight so others don't have to. He believed that, lived that, died for that. Grace looked at the photograph, at Hale's face, at the team that had been her family. If I kill you right now, I become you. I become the person who decides others have to die for my mission to succeed. And Hale didn't die so I could turn into the thing we were fighting. Then what? Vale demanded. You arrest me, put me on trial, I'll claim classified operations, national security, everything I did will be sealed. I'll walk in 18 months. No, Grace said. You'll spend the rest of your life in a military prison, forgotten, invisible, just like you tried to make me. She keyed her radio with her free hand. Colonel Briggs, suspect in custody, send medical and MPs to the North Bunker. Vale laughed, a bitter sound. You think you've won. Phoenix Protocol will bury this. They can't afford the publicity. A decorated Master Chief selling out to domestic terrorists. They'll make me disappear. They already have someone who disappears people, Grace said quietly. And I just told them you're alive. That's not what they wanted to hear. Understanding dawned on Vale's face. Phoenix Protocol wanted you to kill me. Yes. But you refused. I'm refusing a lot of things lately. The bunker door slammed open. Light flooded in. MPs with rifles, medics with kits, Colonel Briggs with his sidearm drawn. They surrounded Vale, secured her, started treating her hands. Briggs approached Grace. Are you injured? No, sir. The weapon's discharge. Self-defense. Master Chief Vale attempted to kill me. Her weapon malfunctioned. Vale started to protest, but the MPs were already reading her rights. already taking her away. Her voice faded as they dragged her into the night, still shouting about classified operations and national security and Phoenix protocol. When the bunker was empty except for Briggs and Grace, the colonel holstered his weapon. "You could have killed her," he said. "Yes, sir." "Phoenix protocol wanted you to." "Yes, sir." "Why didn't you?" Grace looked at the photograph still in her hand. "Because someone once taught me that we fight so others don't have to, and killing her would have meant fighting became the only thing I know how to do." Briggs studied her for a long moment. "What happens now?" "Now I file my report. Phoenix Protocol completes their case. Vale stands trial for treason, espionage, and conspiracy to commit murder. The evidence I've gathered over 3 years will be enough to convict her even with the classification issues." "And you?" Grace pulled out her encrypted phone and powered it on. There were already 3 messages waiting from Phoenix Actual. "Mission parameters changed. Why is Vale alive? Terminate target or justify deviation. Await further orders." Grace typed her response slowly. "Mission complete. Raven Prime neutralized. Network dismantled. Requesting separation from Phoenix Protocol effective immediately. Sparrow 6 signing off." She powered down the phone and dropped it on the concrete floor. Then she crushed it under her boot. "I'm done," she said to Briggs. 3 years undercover, 3 years invisible, 3 years waiting to avenge my team. But killing Vale wouldn't bring them back. It would just add another ghost to the collection. "What will you do?" Grace looked at the photograph one more time. Then she carefully folded it and placed it in her pocket, next to the 18 brass casings that represented 18 lives saved. "I'm going to find Hale's daughter," she said. "Tell her about her father. Tell her that he was a hero who believed in honor and sacrifice and protecting others. Tell her that the best way to honor his memory is to live a life he would have been proud of." She walked toward the door, limping now, the adrenaline wearing off and leaving only pain. "Mrs. Harding," Briggs called after her. Grace turned. "The Pentagon is going to offer you reinstatement, full rank, back pay, choice of assignment. They're impressed with what you did here. Tell them I appreciate the offer, but Grace Harding is retiring, for real this time." "And Sparrow 6. Grace smiled just slightly. "Sparrow 6 died with her team in 2020. She's just been taking a while to accept it." She walked out of the bunker into the Montana night. The stars were still bright, the air was still cold, but something felt different now, lighter. Behind her she heard footsteps. Grace turned to find Marcus Harlow standing there, still in his combat gear from the extraction, looking uncertain. "Sergeant," she acknowledged. "Ma'am," he said, then caught himself. "Or should I say Captain?" "Grace is fine." Harlow shifted his weight, uncomfortable. "I need to say something. This morning I mocked you, kicked your mop bucket, treated you like you were nothing, and then you saved my life, saved my whole team. You already thanked me." "That's not what I need to say." Harlow looked her in the eyes. "I spent 10 years in the SEALs thinking I was the toughest thing walking, thinking support staff were beneath me, thinking strength meant being loud and aggressive and dominant." He gestured at the bunker, at the base, at everything that had happened. "You taught me I was wrong. Real strength is being invisible when you could demand attention. Real courage is doing the right thing when no one's watching. Real honor is protecting people who don't even know they need protection." Harlow straightened to attention and rendered a perfect salute. "Thank you, Captain Harding, for saving our lives, and for teaching me what a warrior really looks like." Grace returned the salute, military crisp despite her exhaustion. "You learned, Sergeant. That's all that matters. Now take that lesson and pass it on. Respect everyone. Value everyone. Because the person mopping your floor today might be the person saving your life tomorrow." Over the next 2 weeks, Fort Sentinel transformed. The security breach was sealed. The conspiracy dismantled. Davis and Kowalski were court-martialed. Vale was transferred to a maximum security facility to await trial. And Grace Harding stopped being invisible. Not by choice. Word had spread through the base about what had happened, about the janitor who was really a Delta Force legend, about 18 impossible shots in impossible conditions, about 3 years spent gathering evidence while being mocked and dismissed. People started treating her differently, standing straighter when she walked past, thanking her for her service, asking for autographs, for stories, for wisdom. Grace hated every second of it. She had spent 3 years being invisible because invisibility was safe, comfortable, controllable. Being visible meant being vulnerable, meant people looking at you and seeing your scars, your pain, your failures. But she endured it because the mission wasn't quite finished. On her last day at Fort Sentinel, Grace found Ahmed in the mess hall during the morning shift change. He was translating for a new arrival, a refugee family being processed through the base. "You're leaving," Ahmed said when he saw her packed duffel bag. "Medical retirement approved, effective today." "Where will you go?" Grace pulled out an envelope. "West Point, New York. Hale's daughter is a sophomore there. She wrote me a letter. Wants to meet the woman who served with her father." Ahmed smiled. "She wants to hear the stories. She wants to join Delta Force, follow in his footsteps. I'm going to try to talk her out of it." "Will she listen?" "Probably not. Hale was stubborn. She's his daughter, so she's probably worse." Grace handed Ahmed a second envelope. "This is for you, recommendation letter. I talked to some people at State Department. They're always looking for qualified translators with combat experience. The pay is better and you won't get shot at as much." Ahmed took the envelope, clearly moved. "You didn't have to do this. Hale saved your family. You kept my secret for 3 years. We're even." "We were always even, Grace. I kept your secret because it was the right thing to do, because some debts transcend cultures and borders and politics." He extended his hand. Grace shook it. "Take care of yourself, Ahmed." "You too, Sparrow." Grace found Marcus Harlow in the motor pool, helping the mechanics service vehicles. He was actually helping, not supervising, his hands dirty with grease, listening to instruction from an enlisted specialist. "Learning a new trade, Sergeant?" Grace asked. Harlow looked up, grinning. "Figured if I'm going to drive these things, I should know how they work. Staff Sergeant Chen here is teaching me." The specialist, a young woman who couldn't have been more than 25, nodded respectfully at Grace. "Ma'am, we're honored to have you here." "Just passing through," Grace said. "Sergeant Harlow, a word." They walked outside, into the weak Montana sunshine. "I'm leaving today," Grace said. "Wanted to say goodbye." "Where are you headed?" "Wherever I end up. Haven't decided yet." Harlow pulled something from his pocket, a brass casing. The one Grace had given him, the first of the 18 she had caught on Ridge 447. "You keep this," he said. "I made copies for the team, but this one belongs to you." Grace looked at the casing, at the dent from where it had struck the ejection port, at the primer still visible in the base. "That represents the first life I saved that day," she said. "Yours. You sure you want to give it back?" "I'm sure, because every time I look at it, I'm reminded that I was arrogant and blind and cruel to someone who deserved better. I don't need a physical reminder of my failures. Grace pocketed the casing. You learned from them, that's what matters. The team wants to do something for you. A ceremony, recognition, maybe get you a medal or... No, Grace said firmly. I don't want recognition. I don't want ceremonies. I spent 3 years being invisible because that's who I needed to be. Now I'm leaving because being invisible here isn't possible anymore. Harlow nodded slowly. You know, when I first saw you, I thought you were just an old woman who couldn't keep up. I was so wrong it's almost funny. Not almost. It is funny. You kicked a Delta Force operator's mop bucket. For a moment they both smiled. Then Harlow's expression turned serious. If you ever need anything, anything at all, you call me. The whole team feels the same way. We owe you our lives. You don't owe me anything. Just do what I asked. Respect everyone. Value everyone. Pass it on. Grace walked to the main gate for the last time. Her truck was packed. Her rifle was secured in its case. Her invisible life at Fort Sentinel was over. Captain Alina Cross was waiting at the gate. Couldn't let you leave without saying goodbye, Cross said. I figured you'd be too busy with the investigation. Investigation is mostly done. Vale's network is dismantled. Phoenix Protocol is claiming credit, and I've been reassigned to the Pentagon. Promotion to Major, effective next month. Congratulations. It's because of you, Cross said. The detective work, the pattern recognition. You taught me that the answers are usually hiding in plain sight if you know where to look. Grace gestured at the base around them. You would have figured it out eventually. You were already suspicious. But I wasn't acting on it. I was just watching, collecting data, waiting for certainty. You taught me that sometimes you have to act on incomplete information. Sometimes you have to trust your instincts. Cross pulled out a folder. I made you something, unofficial, can't go in any official record, but I thought you should have it. Grace opened the folder. Inside was a document, professionally formatted, with the Department of Defense seal at the top. Commendation for Extraordinary Service. Captain Grace Marieharding, USA Ret. CALLSIGN, Sparrow 6. For exceptional valor and dedication during Operation Phoenix Protocol. Below was a detailed account of Grace's 3 years undercover, the evidence gathered, the network dismantled, the lives saved, written in language that would never see official channels but captured the truth nonetheless. At the bottom was a list of signatures: Colonel Briggs, Captain Cross, Master Chief Ahmed Rashid, and all 8 members of SEAL Team 9, including Marcus Harlow. It's not official, Cross said again, but we wanted you to know we saw you, all of you, not just the legend, the person. Grace closed the folder carefully. Thank you, Captain. This means more than you know. One more thing, Cross said. Hale's daughter, her name is Miranda. She's been asking about you for years. Her mother told her that someone from her father's unit survived, but all the records were classified. She spent the last 5 years trying to find you. I know, that's why I'm going to West Point, to give her some closure. What will you tell her? Grace looked back at Fort Sentinel one last time. At the base where she had spent 3 years being invisible. At the people who had mocked her and the people who had protected her and the people who had finally seen her for what she really was. I'll tell her the truth, Grace said, that her father was a hero who believed in honor and sacrifice, that he died protecting others because that's what warriors do, and that the best way to honor his memory isn't revenge or glory or fame. What is it? Service, real service, the kind that doesn't need recognition, the kind that happens in the shadows, The kind that makes the world a little bit safer for people who will never know your name. Grace got in her truck and started the engine. Through the window, she looked at Cross one more time. "Take care of this place, Captain. There are good people here, people worth protecting." "I will, and Grace, where will you go after West Point?" Grace thought about it, about Phoenix Protocol's attempts to contact her, about the other missions they would offer, about the endless cycle of violence and secrets and invisible wars. "Somewhere quiet," she said. "Somewhere I can just be Grace Harding, not Sparrow 6, not a legend, just a woman who did her duty and earned the right to rest." She drove through the gate and onto the Montana highway. In her rearview mirror, Fort Sentinel grew smaller and smaller until it disappeared completely. On the passenger seat sat the folder from Cross, the photograph of Sparrow Team, and a small wooden box containing the 18 brass casings that represented 18 lives saved. The 19th bullet, the dud round she had used to trick Vale, she had destroyed. That chapter was closed. Grace's phone rang. Encrypted number. Phoenix Actual making one more attempt to bring her back into the fold. She declined the call and blocked the number. "Some wars you won by winning, others you won by walking away." 3 hours into the drive, Grace pulled into a rest stop. She took out the photograph of Sparrow Team and looked at it in the afternoon light. 6 faces, 5 of them gone, one survivor carrying the weight of all their unfulfilled futures. Lieutenant Marcus Hale smiled at her from the photo, his arm around her shoulders, both of them younger and less scarred by the world they had chosen to fight in. Grace spoke to the photograph as if Hale could hear her. "I stopped her, Marcus, found the person who killed you, found them and chose not to kill them, chose honor over revenge. You would have been proud, or maybe disappointed that I didn't put a bullet in her head. Hard to say." She traced Hale's face with her finger. "Your daughter wants to follow in your footsteps, join Delta Force, become a warrior. I'm going to try to talk her out of it. Tell her there are other ways to serve, other ways to make a difference. But if she's anything like you, she won't listen." Grace carefully placed the photograph back in its envelope. "I kept my promise, avenged your death by bringing your killer to justice. Now I'm going to keep the other promise, the one I made to myself. I'm going to tell Miranda about her father, tell her that you were a man of honor who believed in protecting others, tell her that you died a hero." She started the truck again and merged back onto the highway. The Montana landscape stretched ahead, vast and empty and full of possibility. Somewhere to the east, a young woman waited to hear about a father she barely remembered. Further east, Phoenix Protocol was already planning their next operation, already identifying their next invisible warrior. But Grace Harding was done being invisible. She had spent 20 years in shadows, fighting wars in places whose names were classified, taking lives to save lives, becoming a ghost so others could live in the light. 3 more years playing janitor, gathering evidence, hunting a traitor while being mocked and dismissed. 18 shots to save 8 lives. One choice to embrace honor over revenge. And now, finally, permission to rest. Grace didn't know where she would end up, didn't know what came after being Sparrow 6, didn't know if she could ever be just Grace Harding, civilian, after 2 decades of being something else. But she was going to try. Because Lieutenant Marcus Hale had taught her that warriors fought so others didn't have to. And maybe, just maybe, Grace had fought long enough that she had earned the right to be one of those others. To live without looking over her shoulder. To sleep without nightmares. To be visible by choice instead of invisible by necessity. The highway stretched ahead. The sun moved across the sky, and Grace Harding drove east toward whatever came next, carrying the memories of 5 fallen teammates and 18 brass casings, and 1 photograph of people who had once been whole. She had been Sparrow 6, Delta Force operator, 144 confirmed kills, legend of the silent wars. Now she was just Grace, 52 years old, scarred, tired, alive. And for the first time in 3 years, she allowed herself to believe that being alive was enough. That being Grace was enough. That the war, at least her war, was finally over. Behind her, Fort Sentinel continued its mission. The people there going about their business, most of them never knowing that the invisible woman who had mopped their floors had saved their lives in ways they would never understand. Ahead of her, West Point waited, and a young woman who needed to hear that her father had been a hero. And somewhere in between, Grace Harding drove toward a future that was hers to define. The last bullet had been fired. The last enemy defeated. The last ghost laid to rest. What came next was up to her. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, that thought didn't terrify her. It felt like freedom. Grace Harding endured 3 years of mockery because she was hunting a traitor. Every insult, every kicked mop bucket was part of the mission. That's the discipline of warriors who win battles in silence. What moved me most, the 14-second rhythm between her shots wasn't just tactics. It was a promise to a fallen teammate's daughter, every shot a prayer. Have you known someone who carried strength in silence? Someone underestimated who proved everyone wrong? Share your story below. And if this resonated, hit subscribe. More untold stories of invisible warriors are coming. Let's honor them together.